In the late 1980s, a world-famous prophet issued a chilling warning. A bold leader in America would provoke Iran, triggering consequences that would hit ordinary Americans hardest. Few paid attention at the time, dismissing it as political exaggeration or mystical nonsense. But decades later, as Trump rose to power, the signs became undeniable. Every decision, every public statement, every act of pressure against Iran appeared to echo that old prediction. And the warning, once ignored, started to unfold in real time. This isn't a story about abstract prophecy. It's about how political decisions ripple into everyday lives. When leaders escalate tension with nuclear-capable nations, when sanctions squeeze economies, and when threats of military action loom, ordinary citizens, students, workers, families feel the consequences first. Utility bills rise, markets wobble, supply chains falter, and the political discourse becomes a tense backdrop for daily life. Ignoring a warning of this magnitude isn't just reckless, it's dangerous. The prophet didn't predict every detail of events, but the core of the warning was strikingly clear. Provoke Iran, and the fallout lands at home. For Americans, the result wasn't just news headlines. It was financial pressure, uncertainty, and the looming threat of conflict. The prophecy described how the dominoes would fall. Political rhetoric would escalate tension, which would trigger economic instability, social unrest, and heightened risk from military engagement abroad. Attention. This video isn't free. It costs a subscription, a like, and one thoughtful comment. These stories take time to research, connect, and tell the right way. If you value deep history, hidden patterns, and moments that change the world, subscribing helps keep this channel alive. One click supports future investigations, sharper stories, and the next chapter waiting for you. The late 1980s were a time of global tension. The Cold War was winding down, but the Middle East remained volatile. It was in this climate that the prophet made her most specific and unsettling prediction. While leaders and analysts debated sanctions, nuclear ambitions, and regional politics, her focus was not on geopolitics. It was on the human cost. She saw a leader in America who would be bold, impulsive, and driven by spectacle. That leader would confront Iran aggressively, creating shocks that would ripple far beyond the Persian Gulf. Fast forward to the 2010s, Donald Trump emerged as the unmistakable figure fitting this description. Bold in rhetoric, unpredictable in approach, and willing to use unilateral decisions, he became the very leader the prophecy seemed to describe. Experts noted early signs: withdrawal from international agreements, direct threats against Iran's nuclear program, targeted sanctions, and escalatory military posturing. Each move brought headlines and anxiety for Americans. Stock markets fluctuated, energy prices shifted, and ordinary citizens began feeling the pressure. Yet the general public remained largely unaware of the prophecy's relevance. Few connected the dots between decades-old warnings and contemporary policy decisions. Analysts emphasized that while the prophet's description was broad, its alignment with Trump's behavior was remarkable. From trade sanctions to covert intelligence operations, the patterns were clear. The risk wasn't merely diplomatic. It was systemic. Could a prophecy truly anticipate a modern leader's actions decades in advance? Or are these simply coincidences amplified by hindsight? What would you do if a warning like this applied to today's decisions? Comment below with your thoughts. Some say foresight, others see coincidence, but the implications for ordinary citizens remain undeniable. As we dive deeper into this story, we'll explore the escalation itself, Trump's key decisions regarding Iran, the economic and social effects in America, and the consequences that the prophet warned about. The next block will reveal how the crisis unfolded, showing that ignoring a warning doesn't make the risks disappear. It amplifies them. Trump's approach to Iran wasn't subtle. From the moment he took office, every decision seemed to push the warning of the prophet closer to reality. Sanctions were tightened, key nuclear agreements were abandoned, and rhetoric escalated. Ordinary Americans began feeling the pressure, often without realizing the connection to events half a world away. This wasn't just geopolitics, it was about consequences at home. As Trump applied maximum pressure on Iran, gas prices fluctuated, import costs rose, and markets wavered. For citizens, the impacts were tangible. Higher living costs, uncertainty about future energy supplies, and growing unease over potential military conflict. The prophet's warning that the fallout of decisions in Tehran would land squarely on U.S. soil was unfolding exactly as predicted. By 2017, Trump had announced the withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, formerly known as the JCPOA. This action was met with applause from some political allies and immediate concern from global leaders. Iran's response was predictable: vows to accelerate uranium enrichment, rhetorical threats toward U.S. interests, and military posturing in the region. Analysts warned that the situation could escalate quickly, but domestic attention remained focused on politics, not prophecy. The tightening sanctions hit Iran economically, but they also created ripple effects in the United States. Oil prices climbed, supply chains faced disruptions, and international trade uncertainty affected American companies and workers. Farmers, manufacturers, and consumers all began to feel the indirect cost of a confrontation thousands of miles away. Financial experts noted that even small disruptions in Middle Eastern oil markets could translate to higher costs for American families. The prophet's prediction had been precise in its focus. The consequences of a bold confrontation with Iran wouldn't remain abroad. They would return to affect everyday life in America. And indeed, as Trump continued his hardline approach, ordinary citizens experienced increased anxiety about national security, rising prices, and unstable markets. Military tensions added another layer of risk. Targeted drone strikes and covert operations against Iranian forces heightened the potential for retaliation. News reports frequently covered missile tests and naval movements in the Persian Gulf, while Americans watched the situation unfold on their screens. The warning was no longer theoretical. It was visible in headlines, in fluctuating oil prices, and in the growing sense of vulnerability among ordinary citizens. Despite these developments, Trump's administration framed the actions as necessary for U.S. strength. Maximum pressure was the mantra, intended to coerce Iran into compliance. Yet each escalation also amplified the prophet's cautionary message. Bold actions abroad would have real, unavoidable consequences at home. Do you think the consequences Trump faced at home were inevitable, given his policies toward Iran? Or could a different approach have prevented this ripple effect? Share your perspective. Did he fulfill a prophecy? Or did the outcomes result from political choices and global realities? The next block will examine the full scope of the consequences for American citizens, the economic, social, and political fallout that the prophet warned would arrive at home. We'll see how a leader's foreign policy decisions can echo far beyond the battlefield, shaping lives in ways the public may barely notice. The consequences of Trump's decisions regarding Iran were not abstract. They hit ordinary Americans in ways that the public often overlooked. From the moment sanctions tightened and threats escalated, prices at the pump began to fluctuate, grocery bills crept higher, and families felt the strain on their daily lives. Cities far from the Middle East experienced ripple effects through supply chains, energy costs, and market instability. What seemed like a distant geopolitical conflict became an economic reality in American homes. Unemployment risks rose in sectors connected to international trade, and small businesses dependent on imports and exports faced new challenges. The prophet's warning was no longer a theoretical prediction. Every bold move, every declaration, every act of pressure brought the prophecy closer to undeniable reality. Trump's rhetoric and unilateral decisions increased tension in the region, and Americans watched the consequences unfold on television and social media. Media reports covered rising oil prices, market volatility, and the uncertainty in global trade. Citizens worried not just about their finances, but about safety. Families began questioning whether the country could avoid a military confrontation, and debates about the risks of escalation entered living rooms across the nation. People felt a sense of unease that they could not explain fully, as if something they hadn't seen coming was already shaping their lives. The prophet had said this moment would arrive. The fallout from a foreign confrontation would land at home, and that moment had arrived. The strain on everyday Americans wasn't limited to finances. Public anxiety increased, political divisions deepened, and national security became a daily topic of concern. Schools discussed civil defense and the potential impact of a conflict far away. Community meetings included worried citizens asking questions about the government's foreign policy and how it would affect them personally. Mental health professionals noted increased stress levels among populations directly or indirectly affected by economic and political uncertainty. The ripple effects of a geopolitical confrontation were tangible and immediate. The prophet had envisioned a leader whose bold foreign policy choices would generate consequences beyond borders, and Americans were living that vision. Some experts argued that the economic and social consequences could have been mitigated with diplomacy and multilateral engagement, but Trump's approach left little room for compromise. Every provocative statement or action against Iran accelerated the effects at home. The ordinary citizen, often unaware of the prophetic context, still felt the impact. Families budgeting for essentials faced rising costs. Workers in affected industries worried about job security. The link between foreign policy and domestic well-being became undeniable. The prophecy's warning that actions abroad could disrupt lives at home manifested in ways that were measurable and deeply personal. Do Americans hold the power to prevent these consequences through political action? Or are citizens always at the mercy of bold leadership decisions? Could diplomacy and foresight have prevented this strain? Or was the fallout inevitable given the policies enacted? Share your thoughts. Would you have handled the situation differently if warned decades in advance? Commenting is the only way to weigh in, and perspectives vary widely. Some see prophecy, some see political causality, but the result is the same. Ordinary Americans experienced tangible consequences that reached every corner of the country. As the situation escalated, it became clear that ignoring warnings, even decades-old ones, carries real costs. Trump's approach fulfilled the prophecy in its essence. Bold, uncompromising decisions abroad directly impacted the lives of citizens at home. Families adjusted budgets, communities debated safety, and anxiety became a background hum across the nation. The lesson was visible. Leadership choices in the international arena are never isolated. They resonate through economies, communities, and households. What began as a distant geopolitical tension had transformed into a domestic reality, measurable in dollars, stress, and uncertainty. The long-term consequences of Trump's actions toward Iran continue to unfold, and the prophet's warning echoes louder than ever. The decisions made in the first years of his administration set a chain reaction that ordinary Americans are still feeling today. From economic strain to heightened military tension, the impact was not confined to the Middle East. It landed squarely on American soil. Families who budgeted carefully for years suddenly faced rising costs at the gas pump and in grocery stores. Businesses reliant on imports and exports grappled with disruptions, while stock markets experienced volatility that rippled into retirement accounts and investments. The prophecy was no longer distant. It had become measurable reality. Trump's escalation strategy brought headlines, but the real consequences were quieter, insidious, and widespread. Communities far from Washington and Tehran felt the effects as the global economy adjusted to the threat of conflict. Public anxiety increased, and political polarization deepened as citizens debated whether the administration's approach was necessary or reckless. The prophet's warning had highlighted precisely this risk. Bold foreign actions would not remain abroad. They would reverberate at home, affecting daily life in ways that were subtle yet persistent. Citizens realized that every statement, every sanction, every military maneuver carried weight beyond the international stage. The tension also affected national security awareness. Americans became more conscious of the possibility of escalation and retaliation. Families discussed evacuation plans and contingency measures. Schools and workplaces incorporated discussions of international tension into curricula and emergency planning. The human cost, while not always visible, was tangible. Stress levels rose. Mental health professionals observed increasing anxiety, and the country collectively experienced the echo of decisions made thousands of miles away. The prophecy had spoken of a leader whose actions abroad would create domestic repercussions, and now the consequences were undeniable. Economic effects continued to compound. Oil prices surged during periods of heightened tension, impacting everyday expenses from transportation to heating bills. Small businesses faced increased costs for imports, delays in supply chains, and uncertainty in planning. Citizens across the country felt pressure on their finances, a direct and immediate consequence of policy decisions that many had assumed were distant and removed. The prophecy was clear. Ordinary people would pay the price for foreign escalation. Every American household became a part of the unfolding story, whether they realized it or not. Do leadership decisions inevitably create domestic ripple effects? Or could a different approach have prevented this strain? Was the prophet simply foreseeing the natural outcome of bold policies? Or is there something more mysterious at play? Comment below with your thoughts, because this story is far from over. Some Americans view these events as political causality. Others see them as fulfilling an ancient warning. Whatever the interpretation, the impact is real, measurable, and ongoing. Looking ahead, the lesson is stark. Bold foreign policy choices carry domestic consequences that cannot be ignored. The prophet's warning serves as a reminder that leadership is not just about international strategy. It's about understanding how decisions ripple through the lives of ordinary citizens. The tension between ambition abroad and responsibility at home is a balancing act that, if mismanaged, has immediate repercussions. Every choice, every escalation, every provocative statement carries weight. The future remains uncertain, but one truth is clear. Ignoring warnings, whether prophetic or based on expert analysis, comes with a price, and Americans continue to live with the consequences. The story of Trump and Iran is not simply one of international conflict. It is a cautionary tale of foresight, responsibility, and the human cost of leadership decisions. The prophet's warning was precise in its essence. Actions abroad inevitably affect citizens at home. From economic pressures to social stress and national anxiety, the chain reaction continues. Ordinary Americans are living proof that prophecy, policy, and consequence are intertwined in ways that cannot be ignored.